Hello, my name is Kover Heischman, and I work for the Office of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices here at JMU. Prior to coming to Summer Springboard, you completed a one-book step where you watched 4 videos to familiarize yourself with the policies, procedures, and resources at JMU for alcohol, drugs, sexual misconduct, and Title IX sexual harassment. Before you spend time with the orientation staff discussing several scenarios that you might encounter during your time at JMU, we want to touch on a few specifics regarding cannabis, consent, and incapacitation. Since there were changes to cannabis laws in Virginia last summer, we want to highlight the impacts to JMU policy and enforcement. Virginia law allows persons over the age of 21 to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis or an equivalent amount of cannabis products and to share with other persons over the age of 21. It is illegal for any person under the age of 21 to consume, purchase, or possess, or attempt to consume, purchase, or possess cannabis or marijuana products. It is illegal to sell or purchase cannabis in Virginia. It is also illegal to consume cannabis or cannabis products in public spaces. With that being said, the Federal Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act prohibits possession and/or use of cannabis on college campuses that receive federal funding. JMU does receive federal funding. Therefore, the Office of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices will see any cannabis possession or use cases on campus for any student, regardless of age. The Office of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices will also see off-campus cannabis cases that do not comply with Virginia law. The videos you watched prior to today were intended to prepare you for this session. Today, you are going to spend some time talking about consent. This is an important and complex conversation that we need you to be fully present for. We also know it has been a long day, so if you need to step out of the room for a minute to collect your thoughts or catch your breath or even use the restroom, that is perfectly okay. In the JMU Student Handbook, consent is defined as an outward demonstration through understandable words or actions that convey a knowing and voluntary agreement to engage in mutually agreed upon sexual activity. Consent cannot be obtained by physical or verbal coercion that is expressed or implied, which includes the use of intimidation, threats, force, or duress. Consent cannot be obtained by ignoring or acting in spite of the objections of another, by previous consent, or by taking advantage of another person's incapacitation or physical helplessness, where one knows or a reasonable person should have known of such incapacitation or helplessness. An individual who is incapacitated because of age, disability, voluntary activity, or through the acts of others cannot give consent. Silence or absence of resistance does not imply consent. Consent is voluntary and may be withdrawn at any time. By communicating the withdrawal through an outward demonstration of understandable words or actions. It is very important to know that consent cannot be given by someone who is incapacitated. In the JMU Student Handbook, incapacitation is defined as physical or mental inability to make informed, rational judgments. States of incapacitation include, without limitation, sleep, blackouts, unconsciousness, and the inability to make such decisions due to the voluntary or involuntary use of alcohol or drugs. Incapacitation may occur because of age, disability, voluntary action, or the acts of others. Incapacitation is typically a result of intoxication from alcohol or drugs. Before initiating any sexual encounter, it is your responsibility to reasonably know whether someone is incapacitated. Please remember this: alcohol and drugs will reduce mental functions before physical signs of intoxication appear. Someone can be incapacitated without showing outwardly that they are unable to make rational decisions and therefore give consent. When examining a situation, the following questions will be asked. Did the person know the other person was incapacitated? Should they reasonably have known that the other person was incapacitated? Someone exploring these questions will be evaluating the facts to determine whether a reasonable person would have concluded the person was incapacitated. Here are 2 rules. You should reasonably know someone is incapacitated if you have observed them drinking alcohol. If you know someone has been drinking, be safe and assume that they cannot give consent. If you see any physical signs of intoxication, slurred speech, stumbling, losing consciousness, acting significantly differently than their normal self, or memory problems, you must assume incapacitation. Now you will spend some time in your small group looking at several scenarios. Please understand that we are asking you to consider some very high level and complex information in a relatively short period of time. That is why each scenario will end at a critical point so that you can focus your attention on further developing your understanding of consent and incapacitation. We will have the basic definitions of consent and incapacitation on the screen so you have them available to you during the scenario work with your small group. I'm now going to read a brief description of a scenario. There are copies of the scenario on your table, or you can follow along on the screen. J and M have dinner together with some friends. After dinner, J and M and their friends head to a party. When they arrive at the party, someone offers J and M each a drink. Both J and M refuse because they each have things to do the next day. J and M hang out together at the party the entire evening and have a great time chatting and dancing. At one point, J says to M, I really like you. I'm really attracted to you and I want to kiss you. Can I kiss you? M, who has been listening intently, smiles, leans in and says, yes, please kiss me. I thought you would never ask. I am now going to read a brief description of a scenario. There are copies of the scenario on your table, or you can follow along on the screen. This time, the group decides to pregame first before going to the party. J has assignments the next day, so does not drink, but M has a few drinks at the pregame. When walking to the party, J notices that M seems to be laughing louder than usual and stumbles a few times. At the party, J turns down all offers for drinks, but M chugs their first cup of punch and drinks a few more cups during the night. Over the next few hours, J and M are with each other the whole time, laughing, dancing, and having fun. Eventually, while dancing, J says, M, I really like you. Can I kiss you? M stumbles closer to J, and J has to steady M so M doesn't fall. M laughs, looks into J's face, and says, let's kiss. But M is slurring their words. M also leans into J. I am now going to read a brief description of a scenario. There are copies of the scenario on your table, or you can follow along on the screen. Just like the last scenario, after dinner, the group decides to pregame before going to the party. J has assignments the next day, so does not drink. M pregames a few drinks. This time, though, instead of going to the party with M and the group, J stays behind at their dorm to work on assignments. When M and the group get to the party, M chugs 1 cup of punch, then has a few more over the next few hours. M notices that M is feeling good and laughing more than usual. At one point, M falls over while dancing and finds it funny how hard it is to get back up. Meanwhile, back at the dorm, J finishes their assignment around 12:45 a.m. J texts one of J and M's mutual friends to see if they are still at the party. Hearing that they are, J gets an Uber to the party, arriving at 1:30 a.m. At about 2 a.m., M notices J is now at the party and is happy to see J. Realizing how attracted M is to J, M goes over and starts dancing with J. After a few minutes of dancing, M leans in and says to J, I really like you. I want us to kiss. Can we kiss? M's speech is slurred and M is having trouble not falling into J. In the scenarios involving J and M, we have really only scratched the surface. We encourage you to continue to think about all of this, and then during 1787, you will participate in an educational program focused on healthy relationships. Both experiences will further increase your understanding of consent and ability to apply this knowledge in a variety of circumstances. In the meantime, remember that in considering whether or not consent is even obtainable, we ask ourselves about whether the person is in a state to be able to consent. If we are not sure, then we should assume they can't consent. A few reminders. Consent must be gained for each and every action. Consent for one sexual act does not mean consent is present for another sexual act. Consent at one point in time does not mean that someone is giving consent for the future. Asking for consent and waiting for a response is the safest way to know if someone is giving consent or not, as long as incapacitation is not a factor. When incapacitation is a factor, that means the individual cannot consent to sexual activity. Checking in is crucial. You may have noticed in the scenarios, we never indicated the gender or sexual identity of J or M. Perhaps you found yourself wondering about it, and perhaps you did not. The bottom line is that the rules of consent apply regardless of the individual identities of the parties involved. Thank you all for engaging in this very important activity. Hopefully, this brief opportunity has not only increased your understanding of consent and incapacitation, but has increased your confidence in being able to apply your understanding under a variety of circumstances. As your OPA indicated, we only began to introduce you to this, and your exploration of these topics will continue over the coming weeks in mandatory orientation programs. Before you leave, we want to remind you that there are several resources available to students who have experienced some form of sexual misconduct. These resources are divided into two categories: confidential resources and reporting resources. Confidential resources are those which do not share information about incidents of sexual misconduct involving students with anyone on or off campus. At JMU, the confidential resources are the Counseling Center, Victim Advocacy, and the University Health Center. Those are places you can go on campus to seek out medical attention, resources, and support, knowing that information you share with them will not be shared with others. Off-campus confidential resources are the Collins Center, Centera RMH, which is the local hospital, any medical provider, and any therapist or counselor. Reporting resources are those that must share the information with the Title IX office if they learn about incidents of sexual misconduct. They can still offer support and direct students to confidential resources, but they can't keep information to themselves. All faculty on campus are considered reporting resources. All administrative offices, except the Counseling Center and University Health Center, are considered reporting resources. And that includes anyone who works in a residence hall and for the Office of Residence Life. Please remember that anyone who has experienced sexual assault can go to the police for assistance. Thank you again for your time and attention, and for choosing to join the JMU community. If you have any questions, you may ask your OPA, or you may reach out to the Office of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices, or the Title IX office. You can Google JMU Office of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices, or JMU Title IX to get our email, phone numbers, and other contact information. Thank you again, and welcome to JMU.